Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. How to buy comic books. Well, I think we all know how to buy comic books, but what I wanted to talk to you about today was, how to approach some sellers when it comes to buying the books that you want. Some of this information may seem like common sense, but, from what I've heard, from what I've seen, sometimes common sense isn't so common, especially when it comes to trying to make that purchase. So let's get into it. Of course, flat out, when you want to go buy a comic, you pay for the money and then that's the end of it. But I mainly wanted to focus in on, sometimes how to try to get what you want when it comes to paying for a comic. A lot of times we go to these conventions, we go to the stores, and we'll see a comic book up on the wall, whether it's raw or graded, it doesn't matter. We'll see a price on it. And many times, a lot of us say, hey, I'd like to get a little off on that. I'd like to get a deal, so to speak. Okay? Well, what I found that really helps, and again, this is common sense, but I've noticed sometimes this doesn't always happen when it comes to other people buying comic books. I would try, if you wanted to try to get a deal, if you didn't want to just flat out pay for it, like the asking price, I should say, the kind of amount of money that I would request off the book, if you check how much it's going for, okay, a lot of times sellers, they have their comic books at prices, whether it's you're going to a store, whether it's on eBay, wherever it is you go buy, a lot of times you'll probably encounter, but not all the time, somewhat of a fair price. And of course, there are people that mark up their books and all that stuff. Well, that's a different story. But a lot of times you'll find people that have their books priced fairly. Now, there are buyers out there, and I don't know, there are buyers that sometimes, from my experience, have the attitude that they don't really want to pay big bucks for big books. They want the big books, but they really don't want to pay for them. And they'll complain about any price. Those individuals, unfortunately, are hard to reach. And I don't know if this video is necessarily for them. I think I told this story, excuse me, a few years ago when I went to New York Comic Con. Now that's a scenario where a lot of times the books are, in my experience, marked up. They're marked up for many reasons. The dealers have to pay for their table. It's one of those big events. That's one of those events that you would probably expect comic books to be marked up. But anyway, there was this one guy that had a very fair price on an Avengers, what was it? It's the first full Black Knight, whatever one that is. Forgive me if I don't remember. Avengers 46 maybe, or something like that? 48? I don't remember. I don't have that book in my collection anymore. But anyway, the dealer was, giving him a fair price, because at that time I was looking for that book too. So I knew how much the fair price was. And there was this guy there, he's looking at it, and he's looking on his phone right in front of the guy. Right? Which I think is kind of like don't do that. If somebody says, hey, this is the price of the book, and you're just looking it up right in front of them, I think it's kind of rude. And, sometimes as I sell books, I'm not a flipper, but as I sell books to try to upgrade, if someone would do that to me, now this is just me, I would kind of get a little ticked off, all right? But that's just me. But anyway, he's looking it up on on GPA. You should have GPA or something that shows sold listings, so you have an idea what these things go for, if you don't already. He's looking it up. He's trying to renegotiate with the guy. And then I think the guy came down a little bit more. And he says, that's the best price I could do, man, for this grade. And it was better than what it was going for, especially at a place like this, New York Comic Con. And it wasn't even the last day of the Comic Con. And the guy's still there. No, kid you not, I must have been waiting there for about 20 minutes because I was going to jump on that book if he didn't pick it up. And that's how long he was just looking at it and sighing and going back and forth. And then there was a point towards the end, I just wound up leaving because I just got so tired. It's ridiculous. There was a point where he called somebody right in front of the guy saying, yeah, he's selling it for this. What do you think I should do? I'm like, and the book wasn't that expensive. It's not like this was a book that was $1,000 book or a $500 book or a $300 book. I mean, just going crazy over such a low price. And, and here's my advice. I would advise you not to do that. Because, if you do that to a seller, the chances are the seller will consider you a pain in the ass, unless the seller is desperate. You would be considered a pain in the ass, and the seller won't sell it to you, and you might be missing out on something that's, beneficial for you. I'm not talking about FOMO or anything like that, but, there are books out there that are priced very well, and that's a price that's, time to jump on it, I mean, there are other factors in that. So I would avoid that. Another thing that I would avoid, now, I could make a whole video on things when it comes to sellers, how some things that sellers piss me off, when you go up, you bring up a book, the books are not priced, and you go up to the seller, and at the register, they want to start looking up the prices. Oh, that's, I wouldn't do that as a seller either. I would have your books priced. Don't be lazy. You might have to check the prices every now and then. If there's a hot book that you want to raise the price on, that's something that you have to be, as the store owner or as the comic dealer, to be aware of and be, on target with. But that's another story. That's another video. But anyway, another thing that I would not do is, and this is just probably so simple, you got to work on your communication skills. And some people get offended by that, but no, and most people are cool, but there are some buyers out there that really need to work on how they communicate with people when it comes to getting a nice price or getting a deal or getting something like that. I know a lot of people, dealers and so forth, that will work with you. But it really depends on the offer that you're making, of course. Don't come down with ridiculous offers. If something's $1,000, don't say, I'd like to pay $400 for it. That's ridiculous. That's insulting. Don't waste time with that. I mean, I wouldn't do that. Try to be reasonable with your offers. But anyway, if you want to be reasonable, the other thing I would say is just don't go up to the seller with this sense of entitlement. You should say, hey, how are you? I'm interested in this book. I was wondering if we could do a little bit better on it, some type of wording like that. And sometimes sellers don't like that. Well, then it's time to move on. But generally speaking, if you come off nice and soft and try to be authentic and genuine, you'll probably get better results. But I've seen and I've heard stories like this where people, they come up, they want a deal on a comic, and the first thing out of their mouth is, what's the best offer you could give me on this? Or what's the lowest you're going to take on this? I mean, right from the start, I don't think you're not off on the right foot. A lot of times, and this is something that I've learned from my comic book shop guy. A lot of times they'll just look up at the wall and say, what's the lowest you're willing to take on that book? He'll respond by saying, well, what's the highest you're willing to pay? And if that customer, gets all upset, screw him. It's probably, again, going back to what I said earlier in the video, a pain in the ass customer that's probably not really interested in buying anything anyway, just wasting people's time. I mean, what do you think that book goes for? If you're unsure of the price, I mean, you're looking at a Batman 227, a book that you're interested in. You mean to tell me you don't know that an 8.0 goes for this amount? I mean, So try to go there, try to be authentic, try to be genuine, authentic, genuine, same thing. Don't make unreasonable offers, And I know some people say, well, you never know, they might accept it. Yeah, but I would say that's kind of rare. I mean, sure, it happens. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but you hear people like when they're doing on eBay, they make a really lowball offer, and then the seller accepts. But I would imagine for some of the major books, probably not the case all the time. So in closing, I think that's a good way to get the comic books that you want. Try to have a good attitude if you're trying to get a deal. Try to build a rapport with the seller. And, I think that you'll have a higher chance of success of paying a price that you're more comfortable paying and getting some good books. Now, I should make a video on sellers, like the opposite. I don't want to come down on buyers. Sellers sometimes are, we have our issues with them as well. But I think this is some pretty good advice. This is advice that's helped me over the years. I never go into a situation. I don't have it in me to go up to somebody, even somebody I know, okay? It's not just some stranger at a convention or some dealer or whatever. Even someone that I've known for years that I've bought books over and over again, I never ask, well, what's the lowest you're willing to go on this? Or what's the lowest you can give me? What's the best you can do on this? Yeah, I never do that. I avoid that question altogether. I try to talk with them and try to be reasonable. Just be a little reasonable when it comes to these sort of things. Well, that's my advice. It's probably advice that you already knew about. I don't think there's really any skeleton key to get into the house of deals when it comes to comics. You got to kind of work your own way and figure it out. But I think these are just some tips to keep in mind. Just, try to build a relationship. Don't come off as entitled, because, there's some people that don't like it, and then there are some people that really don't like it. All right. So keep that in mind. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.